Welcome to the weekly report. It's April 8 and I'm Robert Barwick. I'm joined again today by CEC founder and leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Robbie. Yep.
All right, we've had a very dramatic week, which we want to cover a bit in this week's weekly report. So for that reason, we have two items to discuss. The first, summarising this week's events, is British agents freak as the CEC leads the fight on the carbon tax and food security. And secondly, British genocidalists target Aussie food production in their war on the nation state. So first, we caused a freak out among British agents this week as the CEC led the fight that's gripped Australia on the carbon tax and on the question of food security. It became quite dramatic. There was a number of incidents this week that showed the threat the CEC poses to the British Crown control of Australia, which of course is threatened by what we refer to as the mass strike. The sense that the people fundamentally have had enough, which showed up in the real passion displayed in the vote in the New South Wales election. And from the standpoint of the people, what they are focusing their rage on is things like the carbon tax, etc. And our role in this provoked real hysteria from the agents of the Crown in Australia, whose job is to take this kind of backlash and manipulate it so it doesn't become a threat to the establishment itself. Firstly, we had a number of carbon tax rallies around the country. The biggest one was in Sydney last Saturday, which was attended by a group of CEC members and supporters led by New South Wales State Secretary and National Chairman Anne Lawler, and also it was attended by Queensland State Secretary Jan Pacullis. These carbon tax rallies are being well attended by people, by the Australian people, because of course the Australian people hate the carbon tax. They hate the emissions trading scheme. They see it as something that's going to destroy them. So they're turning up in droves. But the rallies are being organised by groups that are fronts for the Mont Pelerin Society. Now the CEC has long exposed the Mont Pelerin Society. It's a British Crown funded economic warfare unit which has, since it was set up in 1947, forced down the throat of nations the free trade policies of the British Empire. So in the case of Australia, the Mont Pelerin Society, through its fronts such as the Institute of Public Affairs, the Centre for Independent Studies in Sydney, the Tasman Institute, etc., it's the Mont Pelerin Society that has spearheaded the privatisation of our assets, the deregulation of our industries, the free trade slashing of tariffs, etc., that have destroyed our economy, all on behalf of the Crown. Now, it's these clowns that are organising the carbon tax rallies, right? So that they can make sure that the backlash from the people doesn't fundamentally go anywhere to change the system. So not surprisingly, given who they are, our presence at these events completely freaks them out. So what happened this week, and you'll see some footage of this, at the Sydney carbon tax rally, and as with all the other rallies, the CEC sticks out like a sore thumb, because you have a host of placards attacking Julia Gillard, etc. The CEC's placards attack the Queen, the person who ordered all the Commonwealth nations to take the lead on these kind of suicidal policies such as a carbon tax. So we're highlighting the role of the Queen, and consequently we stick out from everybody else at these events and attract a lot of attention. In the case of the Sydney rally last Saturday, the organisers tried to have us removed by the police, which was quite a silly thing to do because all it did was attract even more attention. And a lot of the public who were there was saying, what the hell's this for? Don't they want people to attend these rallies? That didn't work. The police knew they couldn't really move us on. So what they ended up doing, the organisers ended up doing, was posting some clown to stand beside our display carrying a sign saying that the CEC is not part of their rally. We did not have official approval to be associated with their rally. So this is stupidity, but of course it's stupidity driven by total hysteria on their part. In another incident here in Melbourne this week, which definitely proves hysteria, we had an act of censorship of the CEC by the Rupert Murdoch-owned news media. Now, a lot of people say, why isn't the CEC ever in the news? If what you guys say is true, why aren't you ever in the media? Well, there's a good reason for that. We're not supposed to be, and that was borne out with this event this week. On Wednesday, the Herald Sun, which is Rupert Murdoch's biggest paper in Australia actually, ran an article claiming that 66% of Australians supposedly supported a carbon tax. Not only was that completely laughable, it was just a typical type of Murdoch lie that he's said in cahoots with the Greens, but it attracted a lot of attention on the Herald Sun's website. By 8 o'clock, it had been posted at midnight. By 8 o'clock in the morning, 200 people had written replies saying this was rubbish. At 8:24, some probably junior journalists at the Herald Sun posted on the website an update, and the update featured quotes from none other than CEC leader Craig Isherwood from a press release Craig had issued the day before, which is on our website, called "The Queen's Carbon Tax is Designed to Kill." The update quoted Craig as representing the anti-carbon tax forces in Australia, and what they quoted Craig saying was fitted very well. It was a very good article, actually, straight up and down coverage. That posting on the website barely lasted an hour. In fact, I doubt it even lasted half an hour. It was pulled down almost as quickly as it was put up, because whoever made the decision at the junior level of the Herald Sun to post that article obviously breached the written or unwritten rule that you don't cover the CEC, and someone higher up the food chain at the Murdoch establishment would have had absolute conniptions over it. And then the other event I want to highlight this week is we intervened at an event on food security in Australia. Now, I'm going to talk a bit more about food security in a minute, but food security is a very important issue that the CEC has been leading on for a long time. So there was a summit here in Melbourne on food security, but it was sponsored by none other than the World Wildlife Fund. And it featured as one of its leading speakers none other than Professor Tim Flannery. And that straight away told us that this was not a summit about food security, this is a summit about depopulation and starvation. The World Wildlife Fund is the organisation founded by Prince Philip to reduce the world's population. Tim Flannery is the man who for 20 years has been saying Australia's population should be no more than 6 million people. For our people who attended this event, the CEC members of the LaRouche Youth Movement, they could tell in the actual session, when they were talking about food security, it was presented as something that was practically unachievable. There was no hope. And of course, it leads to the conclusion that we've got too many people, which is the role of this thing. So anyway, Tim Flannery, when he was walking into the entrance of this event, walked past Aaron Isherwood. And Aaron Isherwood presented Professor Tim Flannery a copy of a cartoon that we have just recently commissioned, featuring Tim Flannery as the Queen's Corgi. And Tim Flannery, the man who has spearheaded the two major genocide initiatives in Australia in recent times, the shutdown of the Murray-Darling Basin as a member of the leading member of the Wentworth Group, which started this whole rot, and Julia Gillard's carbon tax as the chairman of her Climate Change Commission, the man who wants 3/4 of the Australian population to disappear, Tim Flannery took offence, he said, at our cartoon. Poor diddums. So these three events showed that we're certainly getting under their skin. Craig, my question to you is, isn't it lawful that we provoke these kind of reactions?
Oh, of course it is, Robbie. I mean, look, people hate the carbon tax. And that's clear wherever we go from the comments that we're getting. Why? It's because they know that this tax is designed to kill them, right? And they're reacting accordingly. That's one part of the mass strike that people are reacting to. Look, it's not it's public knowledge, right, that when you get severe weather events or even normal weather events, people die. In Black Saturday period, you know, there was over 3,000 people present to the hospitals for heat stress. There was 400 people died, including 173 in the fires themselves. But I mean, that's a huge number of people to die. And when you start to increase the cost of living for people like pensioners, right, they are going to have to take cuts to their basic pension because the pension's not very high. So what do, they turn off the heating, they turn off the cooling, and suffer the consequences. And this is known. But it's the intention of this tax, again, to reduce the population. As you say, Tim Flannery wants to see only 6 million people. We reduce the means by which you support those people. And in this particular case, the carbon tax is directed directly at that end. But look, at this thing with Murdoch is absolutely hilarious because you know that, well, basically Murdoch is tasked with covering the Queen's arse. That's not a very pleasant job at all. But he's doing that on a global basis. And we know that the editors that he has in his papers, they're controlled at fingertip level by Murdoch. What do we represent? We represent, with LaRouche, the major threat around the globe against the British Empire, against these policies of killing people. So as soon as some person recognised the truth of what I was saying, said, well, that's a good truthful statement, we'll put that in, right, the political hammer came down, which has been doing for 20 odd years. Don't put the CEC or LaRouche in the media. But this also coincides with what we've been doing in the last 3 years, which, people say, we don't see you in the media, as you say, right? They don't see us up there. But look, we have had an enormous effect in shaping the mass strike within this country, in providing the basic materials for people to understand what is taking place with this global carbon tax and previous to that, the emissions trading scheme. And you have to go back to early in 2007, because back at that point, you had a tour by Al Gore. And at that time, there was no institutional resistance to the sort of garbage that's coming out now from all these groups that are promoting the carbon tax, the establishment groups. So Mr. LaRouche internationally was mounting an international campaign, particularly against this fraud, because it was designed to kill people. So in March 2007, we published 540,000 copies of our new citizen called Global Warming is a Fraud. And we spread that around everywhere. Shortly after that, a week later, our LaRouche Youth Movement intervened in the Fifth World Conference of Science Journalists and got the Global Warming Swindle DVD around, got our new set paper under the door of a lot of the residents at the hotel I was staying, and that forced the issue of the Great Global Warming Swindle to be eventually aired on ABC, of which a large number of the audience were actually CEC people that dominated that. Now, it's really quite ironic that was really the beginning of the Q&A program on ABC. That was the very first one, actually. But I've never been invited onto it. So, again, this is proof that they don't want us on television because we might say things that don't fit the format. We might speak the truth instead of this propaganda. Now, we've been mobilising consistently right through 2008. And in June 2009, Al Gore himself came down to a basically tin-rattling propaganda, financial extravaganza with the Australian superannuation industry. And the irony there is that, of course, Al Gore is a partner in a firm with a guy by the name of David Blood, which specialises in financial derivatives in green carbon credits, right? So we joke that he have he's involved in a company called Blood and Gore, which is what the intent is, right? A Goldman Sachs front, yeah. So this is the sort of fraud that people sort of wake up to when they hear that these sorts of taxes are simply a front for the global monetarist system. So we followed that up with a publication, another 350,000 copies of our carbon trading as Hitler-style genocide, simply to show people that this is a complete fraud from that angle as well. That went out everywhere, right?
And it was just after that Malcolm Turnbull got toppled.
That's right. Right, so, and what was really interesting is that we got the blame for that in the sense that the Courier Mail wrote an article saying that the MPs were complaining that they were getting inundated with emails, right, that we were directing. And the funny part was that we weren't directing emails this particular time. We've done it in the past, but not this time. So this was a measure of the mass strike. People recognised the fraud and they began to bombard their members of parliament, right? Then, we continued on to really nail this issue for people. We produced a real expose on the Fabian Society, on the eugenic networks behind the environmentalist movement that were pushing the carbon trading fraud in our May-June 2010 UCIT. We then saw that this was the same issue for the Murray-Darling Basin. In its shutdown, we produced flyers and attended all but I think 2 of the mass public meetings around the country, providing the background again to this genocide. We've also done several other exposés, really getting to the heart of what this is about. So here you have us behind the scenes providing an enormous influence for many, many people, and it doesn't take very much of the population to wake up before you start to have the conversations around the dinner table about what the truth is. And of course people have got access to our website, and we send out a large number of emails. So when you see Murdoch reacting like this, or when you see the response of the established parties towards us, what they're reacting to is actually our influence behind the scenes with this sort of material going out, and they're terrified about it.
So they're not reacting to this idea that the CEC are nutters from the far fringe. They're reacting to the fact that we're effective.
Exactly, and they know that we're not nutters. Because the quality of our material as we put out, they know that we're not nutters. We substantiate everything we have to put out, and we do it in spades because it's the truth. And you don't have to, go to too much effort to justify the truth. You let the truth speak for itself.
All right, thanks, Craig. Okay, the second thing we want to cover in a little bit of depth is the fact that British genocidalists are targeting Australian food production in their war on our nation state. So, in the context of this week's Food Security Summit that our youth attended, let's have a look at the actual state of food production in Australia and what is being done deliberately to our capacity for food production. And I've got a bit of a summary here. First, let's take the Murray-Darling Basin, which is the principal target right now because it's our food bowl. This basin is one of the driest river basins in the world, yet thanks to our creative intervention over a century, it is one of the most productive. It produces 39% of the food consumed in Australia. However, it also feeds more than 60 million people worldwide. Right, so it's quite an asset when it comes to food capacity in Australia. Consequently, it's the major target of Prince Philip's World Wildlife Fund, Australian Conservation Foundation and Wentworth Group, Prince Tim Flannery's crowd, all of which, of course, were set up to achieve one thing, population reduction. And they have brought the Murray-Darling Basin to its knees. It's a situation now in the basin that if the greenies don't get to destroy it, the bankers will, which we've been exposing. Bankers are fully prepared to mass foreclose on all the farmers there. The very latest aspect of the plans against the Murray-Darling Basin was unveiled by the CSIRO at the start of this week at a climate change conference in Cairns. And I've just brought this along. This was an article from The Age on the 5th of April. The CSIRO, if you can see there, we'll zoom in on it, has unveiled a map that shows how much of the lower Murray-Darling Basin under various levels of a carbon price will be converted from food production to what they call carbon storage. And in the map, the food production areas are in yellow and the carbon storage areas are in green. Carbon storage meaning mainly tree plantations, but also just locking away carbon in the soil, which if you lock it away in the soil, you can't grow on it, right? And so the first map shows an $11 a tonne price, where about a third of it is locked away in carbon storage. The second map shows $26 a tonne price, where more than two-thirds is locked away. And at $36 a tonne price, all the food production land in the Murray-Darling Basin is converted away from food production. All right, and this is what the CSIRO is foreshadowing for the future under a carbon tax. So, and the lower Murray-Darling Basin, of course, is the most productive part of the Murray-Darling Basin. So this is a deliberate targeting of that, and if we don't stop it, that's going to disappear. Secondly, let's look at the mining takeover of farmland. Now, the global mining industry is dominated by what we call the Anglo-Dutch raw materials cartel. The big companies like Rio Tinto, BHP Billiton, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, Anglo-American, etc. And those companies are controlled by the British royal family and the Dutch royal families, right? An example of that is the Queen of England's direct ownership of one of the biggest ones, Rio Tinto. Now, under the power of this cartel, Australia in the past 30 years has been turned into a quarry. Mining production in Australia today is valued at $121 billion compared to agricultural production of $27 billion, right? Mining is everything. Australia is a quarry. Now, what I call the mining monster has been unleashed on some of the most productive farmland in Australia, and it's areas such as the Liverpool Plains in New South Wales, and it's the Darling Downs in Queensland. And they want to tear up this productive farmland to extract things like coal seam gas. And of course, the driver for the coal seam gas and the whole gas industry, which is, it's not just in Australia, it's booming around the world, it's a bubble. And it's a bubble driven by the garbage of climate change, where gas is regarded as a better fuel than oil and coal because it's slightly cleaner, etc., etc., only from a standpoint of carbon dioxide emissions. So the government targets for cleaner energy are driving this total obsession with extracting coal seam gas, which will wipe out in these areas this food production capability. All right, in terms of some specific industries, let's look at the dairy industry, and this is something we've been commenting on lately. Fresh milk is a staple in the diet of any nation, but under dairy deregulation in Australia, which happened 10 years ago, the dairy farmers who supply our fresh milk have been wiped out. You have a situation where we now have an industry dominated by two huge retailers, Coles and Woolies, and two big multinational processors, the Italian Parmalat and the Japanese brewer Kirin, which owns National Foods. The farm gate prices that the farmers get for their milk is more often than not, below cost of productions, but the farmers get no say over that. They're told tough, it's the market. And they're also told more than just it's the market determined by international prices, the international market, not the Australian one. It's the same kind of argument we get for the price of oil we pay in Australia, etc. What's been the consequence of this? Well, take a place like Queensland. The number of dairy farmers in Queensland in 10 years has dropped from 1,550 down to just 580. A lot of those dairy farmers committed suicide. And this is an issue that someone like Bob Catter is very, very passionate about, because a lot of them have happened in his area. However, when the dairy industry was deregulated, the Queenslanders were told they'd be losers. The Victorians and the Tasmanians were told they'd be the winners. What's happening to them? Many of them have also been driven out of business. You've now got these mega dairy farms in Victoria and Tasmania. They've got these 1,000 cattle herds, etc., which is just enormous. But they've also got debts to match. For example, the average debt for the 480 dairy farmers in Tasmania is now over $1 million. That's the average debt. And consequently, we in the CEC, because of our role in this, we get anecdotal reports fed to us all the time by people involved that even here in Victoria and Tasmania, you have a wave of an epidemic of suicides among dairy farmers in those areas as well. So that's the state in general. Along comes Coles, Woolies, and Graham Samuel's ACCC, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, and they are targeting the dairy farmers who are left for annihilation. And it's led by an actual gang of British executives that have been brought in to run Coles, and these executives are veterans of similar campaigns in Britain, which destroyed a lot of their dairy industry. Drove thousands of dairy farmers in England out of business, and now England is dependent on Ireland and the Netherlands for milk. They're importing milk from those countries. What they're determined to do is to crush any vestiges of family farmer or national control over production, so that it is entirely dominated by the multinational corporations who work in this idea of a global free market, i.e. the model of the British Empire. Now, in the case of another industry, the same Coles hijackers have turned their blowtorch onto the egg farmers in Australia, and they've just slashed egg prices on the Coles brand eggs by 20 or 18% to run the same kind of operation on them. And it goes on. I'll stop there in terms of the predicates. But Craig, this is a very disturbing picture. Give people in the time we've got left a bit of a sense of what's going on, but more importantly, what we can do about it.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, look, the way you have to look at this is that our nation is at war. And what is at stake is our sovereignty. And this particular war is against the British Empire that we've spoken a lot about, and the City of London-based monetary system that is literally screwing farmers and screwing our industries into the ground. But this City of London, this British Empire, is determined to destroy nation states, right? And in our particular case, what you've illustrated is that our capacity to produce food is what's on the line. They intend to destroy our food capacity in order to destroy us as a sovereign country. And you see it because the British Empire is deploying its two main weapons. Firstly, free trade and globalisation with its associated deregulation and privatisations. You destroy the actual public ownership of assets, but also radical environmentalism, which we've talked about previously. But really, when I start to think about this, I go back to a discussion I had with Mr. LaRouche back in 1993, where he said the problem that we have in Australia is that we don't understand what sovereignty is. And what Mr. LaRouche says is that Australians tend to confuse sovereignty with autonomy. And that really is the issue. Because if we were really sovereign, we wouldn't tolerate for 1 second what was being done to us now, if we understood that. I mean, the old Labor Party supporters like King O'Malley, Kurt and Chifley, Ansley, they knew what sovereignty really was, and that's why they fought against the British-backed money power at that point. Right? Because they actually knew what it was, they were very, very passionate about it. Now, what is this sovereignty? Well, the idea of sovereignty is the commitment, first of all, to a principle. And that principle is that human beings are not animals, that we are unique, and that we can make discoveries of the principles that run the universe and transform those principles into our economy for the benefit of future generations, to increase the posterity of future generations. That principle is embedded in the preamble of the US Constitution. So it's a well-known thing, and that's why the British Empire has been out to destroy the United States through the, first of all, the American Revolution, secondly through the war with the Confederacy, and so forth. But how does it specifically play out? Well, let's take the banking system. If you're a sovereign country, you have to have a sovereign banking system that provides for the country. That is, you have national banking with credit creation to expand the production of your farmers, of the industries that you need, the strategic industries. You don't ship your industries out overseas. You have them and you support them for domestic production. You don't have big British-based companies come in and, like Rio Tinto, and buy out your raw materials. You know, the Queen's the head of Rio Tinto, the largest private shareholding of Rio Tinto, right? So it's lawful that she would protect her assets and screw the Australian people. If you look at food security, right, you would protect your farmers. You'd bring in parity pricing so that you pay farmers what they're worth. You'd provide the water systems. And this is where people get, not confused, they get a bit stupid, as King O'Malley said, you know, way back 100 years ago, that Australians need to sharpen up with a bit of knowledge. Because look, what happens is you see this yin-yang approach to Australian politics. You know, Tony Abbott is becoming the so-called saviour because he is fighting against the carbon tax. What a load of garbage. I mean, this is a guy that in 2009, December 2009, praised Prince Philip, right, as a mentor, almost like a leader of the Green movement. He praised him publicly on ABC radio.
As his model for what a conservationist is.
Exactly, right? So you had that, right? And then you had what's the pedigree of the Liberal Party? Tony Abbott's Liberal Party, the water, for example, under John Howard, the Water Act was passed. Instead of passing legislation to build up the water reserves in our country, building dams, what happened? We ended up with the Water Act. We ended up with water trading legislation that turned water into commodity for speculation, again, for the British monetary system. So autonomy, right? Autonomy means that you suffer the British Empire. You complain about it, right? Because you don't understand the principle of actually who we are as human beings, as citizens, as sovereign individuals, as we've seen with Ireland, as you've seen with the wars of independence in the United States. You don't tolerate this. And that's why, you know, in many cases, time and time again, people are quite happy to complain. But when it comes to a real fight of principle, they back off it and they compromise. And that's our problem. And Mr. LaRouche saw it from 10,000 miles away 20 years ago, as other great Australians, and that's what we actually have to deal with. And that's why people should really be studying our material, particularly our historical material on our website, to understand this point. Because without understanding what we actually have to become as a nation with this principle of sovereignty, we won't defeat it.
All right, thanks, Craig. That's it for today's weekly report. Thanks for tuning in, and tune in next week for more updates.